Dad, I need you gone before sick. My son said it without looking at me. I was standing in his kitchen, putting away the drill I'd brought over to fix a loose cabinet hinge. Caleb stood near the front window, watching a dark sedan turn onto his street. It was 5:42 on a Saturday afternoon. You invited me over, said. I know, and now you want me to leave. Caleb finally looked at. Some people from work are coming. Tonight's important. I'm 63. I spent 34 years managing building operations for hotels and office properties around Charlotte. I know when someone is giving me the explanation they prepared instead of the reason they mean. What does that have to do with me? It would just be easier. Easier if I wasn't here? His jaw tight. Dad, please. I zipped my tool bag. All right. That surprised him. You're not angry? It's your house. I picked up my jacket. If you don't want me in it when your friends arrive, I'll leave. It's not like that. I looked at him. Then don't make me explain it for you. The sedan pulled into his driveway. Caleb glanced outside and went pale. That caught my attention. A man in his early 50s stepped from the car. Caleb moved toward the door, then stopped. For 1 second, I thought he was going to introduce us. Instead, he said quietly, "Could you go through the garage?" I looked at him, not because I hadn't heard, because I wanted to be certain my own son had actually asked. The garage? The driveway's blocked now. It'll be easier. It wasn't. There was plenty of room. I picked up my bag. No, Dad, I'll use the front door. I walked out. The man from the sedan was halfway up the path. He looked at me. I nodded. Evening. Evening. Behind me, Caleb said nothing. No introduction. No, this is my father. Nothing. I got into my truck and drove home. I didn't call him. I didn't send an angry message. And I didn't spend the night wondering what I should have said. Caleb was 35 years old. If he was embarrassed by his father, he was old enough to own that decision. I just didn't know yet that embarrassment had almost nothing to do with it. At 7:12 the next morning, someone knocked on my front door. I was already awake. The same dark sedan was parked at the curb. The man from Caleb's house stood on my porch. I opened the door. "Can I help you? Walter Hayes?" "Yes." He looked at me for several seconds. "My name's Neil Foster. I was at your son's house last night." I remember. That seemed to make him uncomfortable. "Could I ask you something? You drove across town on Sunday morning. I assume you already planned to." He almost smiled. Then he asked, "Does Caleb know you're still part of his life?" I stared at him. What kind of question is that? Neil looked back toward his car. The kind I was hoping I wouldn't have to ask. I let him inside. We sat at my kitchen table. I poured coffee. Neil left his untouched. "Start at the beginning," I said. He nodded. "Caleb and I have worked together for about 18 months. Graham Cole and I are starting a facilities consulting company. We're considering bringing Caleb in." That made sense. My son had worked in commercial property operations for years. He's good at what he does. We think so too. "Then why are you here?" Neil hesitated. "Because last night Graham asked Caleb how he got into facilities work." I waited. "He told us he had to figure most things out himself. That could mean anything." "I know. Keep going." Neil rubbed his thumb against the coffee mug. "He said his father left when he was 15. I didn't move." "He said what?" "That you walked out." I set my coffee down. Neil continued carefully. "He said his mother raised him alone after that. My wife Diane and I were married for 37 years. She died 5 years ago. Caleb was 30 when we buried her. I had never left either of them." "Did Caleb use my name?" "Yes." "Walter Hayes?" "Yes." "Then you didn't misunderstand." "No." I stood and walked to the bookshelf. There was a photograph from Caleb's college graduation. Diane on his left, me on his right. I handed it to Neil. "When was this taken?" he asked. 13 years ago. Neil looked at it. "If Caleb was 15 when you left, he was 22 in that picture." Neil handed it back. "That's why I'm here." "Because of a photograph?" "No." He reached into his jacket and took out his phone. "Because I knew I'd seen you before." He opened an old picture. It showed a group of maintenance supervisors standing in a hotel mechanical room. I recognized the place immediately. The Westbridge Hotel. I recognized myself too, 10 years younger. Neil pointed at the screen. "You trained our emergency response team." I remembered the project. 3 days of inspections and drills after a generator failure. "You were there?" Second row. Now I remembered him. Not well, but enough. Neil continued. "Caleb told us last night that after you abandoned the family, he had no contact with you for almost 20 years. That would be difficult. I had dinner with him Thursday." Neil nodded. "That's what I suspected when I saw you walk out of his house." Everything about the previous evening shifted. Caleb hadn't simply wanted his father gone before an important dinner. He had wanted me gone before Neil arrived. "Did you confront him?" I asked whether you were his father. "What did he say?" Neil looked directly at me. "He said no." That landed harder than the story about me leaving. "What did he say I was?" "A handyman." I looked down at my hand. There was still a small cut on my thumb from fixing his cabinet. For 34 years, I'd worked with maintenance crew. Apparently that had made the lie easy. What happened after that? Nothing. Not then. Why not? Because Graham was there and this dinner wasn't social. Neil finally took a drink of coffee. "We're deciding this week whether Caleb gets an ownership stake in the company." There it was. Now I understood why the evening mattered, but not why my son's childhood mattered. "So evaluate his work." "We are." "Then whether I left him at 15 shouldn't affect your decision." "It wouldn't." Neil paused. "Except Caleb made it part of his case." I sat down again. "How?" "He's been telling us that his entire approach to business comes from growing up without stability. Father gone, mother struggling, no money, no connections. Diane had been an elementary school teacher. I earned a solid salary. We weren't wealthy. We also weren't unstable. Caleb had braces, summer camps, a used car at 17, and most of his college paid for. He had worked. He had earned things. He simply hadn't suffered the childhood he was selling. Why would that get him ownership? By itself? It wouldn't. Then there's something you're not telling me." Neil Neil looked at his phone. Yes, he opened an email. At the top was Caleb's name. Below it was a document titled Founding Partner Profile. Caleb Hayes Neil handed me the phone. The first paragraph was professional. The second wasn't. After being abandoned by his father as a teenager, Caleb helped support his mother while working his way through college. Those years shaped his belief that trust and accountability matter more than promise. I read it twice. Who wrote this? Caleb. You're sure? He emailed it to us Friday. So this wasn't a story that slipped out over drink. My son had written it down. Deliberate. Can you send this to me? Yes. Neil forwarded. I put my phone on the table. Anything else? He hesitated again. That was becoming a pattern. Graham believed Caleb's story before last night, and you didn't. I had no reason not to. What's different now? You. That was simple enough. Then Neil said, but there's another reason I came. What? Graham knows something about Caleb's past that I don't. How? He knew Diane. I stared at him. My wife? Neil nodded. Years ago, before I met either of them. That was unexpected. From where? I don't know. Did Caleb know Graham knew her? I don't think so. That explained the dinner better. Maybe Caleb hadn't been worried only about Neil recognizing me. Maybe he'd invited someone who could recognize the entire family history. What did Graham say last night? Nothing until after Caleb went upstairs. Then, Neil leaned forward. He asked me if I remembered you from the Westbridge project. And you said yes. Yes. What did Graham say? Neil's expression changed. He said, then we have a problem. I waited. Neil continued. After I left, Graham called me. He told me not to confront Caleb yet. Why? He wanted to check something first. What? A story Caleb told us about college. I felt my attention sharp. What story? That after you left, Diane couldn't afford tuition, so Caleb worked nights and paid his own way. That isn't true. I know that now. How? Neil took a folded piece of paper from his jacket. He placed it on the table but kept his hand on it. Graham found this last night. What is it? Something Diane gave him years ago. I looked at the paper. Why would my wife give Graham anything about Caleb? Neil removed his hand. I think you should read it. It was a photocopy of an old letter. Diane's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. At the top was a date from Caleb's junior year of college. I read the first line, then stopped. Diane wasn't writing about tuition. She was thanking Graham for helping Caleb after an incident at his summer job. An incident I had never heard about. At the bottom, Diane had written, Walter still doesn't know. Caleb begged me not to tell him until he has a chance to fix it himself. I looked up. Neil was watching me. For the first time since he arrived, the lie about my son's childhood wasn't the thing bothering me most. My wife had kept something from me, something involving Caleb, and Graham Cole had known about it for 13 years. I read Diane's letter again after Neil left. The date was July 14th, 13 years earlier. Caleb had been 22. The letter was addressed simply, Graham. Diane thanked him for giving Caleb a chance to correct what happened before it followed him into his first real job. There were no details about the incident, only one sentence that kept bothering me. Walter still doesn't know. Caleb begged me not to tell him until he has a chance to fix it himself. Diane had never been comfortable keeping things from me. So whatever Caleb had done, she must have believed he was going to make it right. I checked the time. 8:36. I could have called Caleb. Instead, I called Graham Cole. He answered on the second ring. Walter, you were expecting me? After Neil went to your house? Yes. I have Diane's letter. Silent. Then I suppose we should talk. Today. I can come to you. No. Give me an address. We met at a breakfast place near South Park. Graham was already in a booth when I arrived. He was 58, broad-shouldered, gray hair cut short. When I walked up, he stood. Walter, have we met? Once. Briefly. When? At the hospital when Diane was sick. That explained why I didn't remember him. Those months had become a blur of doctors, medications, and waiting room. We sat. I placed the copy of Diane's letter between us. What happened to Caleb 13 years ago? Graham looked at the page. He was working a summer job for a property company I managed. Doing what? Maintenance coordination. Mostly paperwork, vendor calls, work order. That sounded like the beginning of Caleb's career. One Friday, Graham continued, we had a serious water leak in a vacant unit. Caleb received the first maintenance report. Did he ignore it? No. That surprised me. He did something worse? Different. Graham folded his hand. He closed the work order. Why? He thought it was a duplicate. Was it? No. The leak continued overnight. By Saturday morning, water had damaged 3 units. How much? About $18,000. Not nothing, but not enough to explain 13 years of secrecy. What did Caleb do? He panicked. Graham looked at me. He changed the timestamp on the work order so it looked like the report came in after his shift. I stopped. That was different. Not a mistake. A cover-up. Did you catch it? Yes. How? The system kept an audit log. I almost smiled despite myself. Computers are inconvenient when you're trying to rewrite the past. Were you going to fire him? Yes. What changed? Diane came to see me. I looked at the letter. She knew? Caleb told her. Not me. No. What did she ask you to do? Not what you're probably thinking. I waited. She didn't ask me to excuse him. She asked whether there was a way he could admit what he'd done, repay part of the loss, and leave without a dishonesty finding on his employment record. That sounded like Diane. Not rescue him. Give him a way to take responsibility. What did you do? I gave him until Monday. And? He came in Monday morning and admitted everything. Repayment? He worked weekends for us through the rest of the summer. We deducted an agreed amount from his pay, so he corrected it. At the time, yeah. Then why didn't Diane tell me? Graham's eyes dropped briefly. Because Caleb was terrified of disappointing you. I leaned back. That doesn't sound like a reason Diane would keep it from me. It wasn't the only reason. There it was. What else? Graham hesitated. Caleb told her you'd stop helping with college if you knew. I stared at him. I would not have done that. I know that now. Did Diane believe him? I think she was afraid he might be right. That hurt more than I expected. Not because Diane had doubted me, because Caleb had apparently understood exactly which fear would keep her quiet. I asked, did you ever see him after that summer? Several times. Why? He asked me for career advice, references. Did you give them? Yes. Good references? When he deserved them. I nodded. So how does this connect to what he's telling people now? Graham looked toward the window. That's what I'm trying to understand. He took out his phone and opened an email. Caleb sent this to me 3 years ago when he applied for a senior operations position. I read the message. Caleb thanked Graham for being one of the first people who helped me when I had nobody at home to guide me. My jaw tightened. At 22, Caleb had lived with Diane and me. I had helped him choose his first car, reviewed his benefits paperwork, driven 2 hours when his transmission failed, but that wasn't the important part. The important part was what Caleb had done with Graham. He had taken a man who knew about one of his worst mistakes and turned him into evidence for the new story. Did you correct him? I told him I wouldn't confirm anything about his family. And? He said he understood. Did you still provide a reference? Only about his work. I handed the phone back. Why didn't you say something last night? Because I wanted to be certain. About me, about Diane. He reached into a folder. This time it wasn't another dramatic letter. It was a photograph. Caleb's college graduation. Diane, me, Caleb. The same picture I'd shown Neil that morning. Except this copy had a note written on the back. For Graham, thanks for giving our son the chance to learn from a bad decision. Diane and Walter. I stared at my own name. I didn't write this. I know. Diane did? Yes. Why sign my name? She told me you knew Caleb had made a mistake at work, just not the detail. That was true. I remembered Caleb telling me he'd mishandled something that summer. He said his supervisor had made him work extra weekend. I had told him that sounded fair. Diane had apparently allowed Graham to believe I knew more than I did. I put the photograph down. My wife wasn't part of Caleb's lie. No, Graham answered immediately. She was protecting a 22-year-old son who had admitted what he'd done. I don't think she imagined he'd use it 13 years later. Neither did I. I asked, are you still considering him for the company? Graham was quiet. Professionally, Caleb is one of the best operations people I've worked with. And personally, that's why Neil came to you. I nodded. What happens now? We meet with Caleb tomorrow. I'm not coming. Graham looked surprised. This is between you and him. He lied about you. Yes, but you're deciding whether to trust him with a company. You don't need me sitting there like Exhibit A. Graham considered that. Fair enough. I stood. Then one question occurred to me. Graham, yes? Last night, did Caleb know you still had Diane's letter? No. Did he know you remembered the summer incident? Of course. Then why invite you to dinner while telling Neil I abandoned him? Graham didn't answer immediately. I've been wondering the same thing. So had I. Caleb's lie was wrecked, but Caleb wasn't. If he had spent years building this version of himself, inviting Graham into a room full of people hearing it made no sense. Unless he believed Graham would stay quiet. Or unless Graham had already stayed quiet for. At 1:17 that afternoon, Caleb called. I answered. Hey Dad, Caleb, Neil came to see you. It wasn't a question. Yes. A pause. What did he tell you? Enough. Did he show you the partner profile? Yes. Caleb exhaled. I can explain. I've heard that phrase before. Dad, please. I met Graham this morning. Silent. Not surprised. Silent. That told me something. You knew I would. I thought you might. He showed me your mother's letter. Caleb said nothing. You remember it? I knew she wrote him one. What happened that summer? Another pause. I made a mistake. No. Closing the work order was a mistake. Changing the timestamp was a decision. He went quiet, you know? Yes. Did Graham tell you everything? I didn't ask him for everything. I asked him what was relevant. Caleb's voice changed. More defensive now. That happened 13 years ago. I know. I admitted it. I know. I worked it off. I know. Then why are we talking about it? Because you're telling people the man who taught you nothing about responsibility abandoned you when you were 15. Silent. Then Caleb said, this isn't about you. That sentence almost impressed me. You wrote a biography about me leaving the family. I mean, the reason I did it wasn't about you. Then what was it about? He breathed out slowly. I can't do this over the phone. Fine. Can I come over? No. Why? Because yesterday you needed me out of your house before your friends arrived. Today you want into mine because the story isn't holding together. That isn't fair. It doesn't have to be. He was quiet. Then he said, Graham isn't telling you everything. I looked toward Diane's letter on my table. What isn't he telling me? The reason he kept helping me after that summer. He said you asked for career advice. It was more than that. How? Caleb hesitated. Ask him why I got my first full-time job. I didn't respond. Dad, I'm here. Ask him who called the hiring manager. Graham? Yes. That isn't unusual for a reference. It wasn't a ref. What was it? Caleb lowered his voice. A favor. I waited. For who? Another silence. Then he said, for Mom. That made me stop. What did Diane ask him to do? She asked him to make sure that mistake didn't follow me. That's not the same as getting you a job. I know. Then what are you saying? Caleb took a breath. I'm saying Graham didn't just give me a second chance that summer. He built my career. I looked at Diane's handwriting again. Why would he do that? Caleb didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Because he owed Mom. The room seemed to shrink. For what? You need to ask him. No, you brought it up. You tell me. I promised her I wouldn't. Your mother has been dead 5 years. I know. Then stop using promises to dead people as a place to hide. Caleb went silent. For several seconds, all I heard was his breathing. Then he said, Graham and Mom knew each other long before I worked for him. I know that. No, Dad. His next words came slowly. They knew each other before she met you. I looked at the letter again. For the first time, I noticed something I'd ignored. Diane hadn't written Mr. Cole. She hadn't written Graham Cole. Just Graham. Like she was writing to someone who already knew exactly who she was. Caleb continued. And if you're going to ask why Graham spent 13 15 years protecting me. He stopped. What? You should ask him what he promised Mom before you and she ever got married. I called Graham from my kitchen. He answered quickly. Walter, what did you promise Diane before she married me? Nothing. Not even a confused response. That told me Caleb hadn't invented this part. Caleb told you, Graham said. He told me to ask. That's not the same thing. Then answer. Graham was silent for several seconds. Not over the phone. I'm getting tired of people saying that. I understand. No, you don't. Yesterday, my son asked me to leave his house because he couldn't let his business associates know I was his father. Today, I'm finding out my wife and one of those associates had an agreement that predates my marriage. It wasn't an affair, Walter. I hadn't asked. The fact that he answered anyway told me where he thought my mind would go. Then what was it? Come by my office. 30 minutes. I hung up. Before leaving, I put Diane's letter in a folder. I also took the graduation photograph. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I wanted something physical in front of me when people started rearranging my past. Graham's office was almost empty on Sunday afternoon. He met me downstairs and took me to a small conference room. I placed the folder on the table. Start talking. Graham sat opposite. Diane and I grew up in the same neighborhood. Caleb said you knew her before me. We did. How well? Very well. I waited. We dated. There it was. How long? About 3 years. When? College and a little after? Diane had told me about a serious boyfriend before we met. She had never given me much detail. I hadn't asked. We were adults. Everybody had a life before marriage. Why did it end? I wanted to leave North Carolina. Diane didn't. That simple? Mostly. And the promise? Graham looked down at the table. Her younger brother. I knew Diane had a brother named Eric. He died before I met her. Car accident. What about him? Eric worked for my father's company one summer. I waited. He made a serious mistake with some invoices. My father wanted to report it. What kind of mistake? He changed numbers to hide purchases he'd approved without authorization. That sounded uncomfortably familiar. Diane asked me to help. And you did? I convinced my father to let Eric repay the money and resign. I understood before Graham finished. Years later, Diane's son had done something similar, changed a record after making a mistake, and she had called the same man. So when Caleb altered that work order, she came to me and reminded you about Eric. No. Graham shook his head. She never had to. What did she say? That Caleb had done something stupid and dishonest, and she wanted him to have one chance to correct it before the mistake became his identity. That sounded like her. What did you promise? Years earlier, after Eric died, Diane asked me for one thing. He paused. If her family ever needed the kind of second chance I'd helped give Eric, I wouldn't refuse just because she and I weren't together anymore. I sat back. That was considerably less dramatic than what Caleb had implied. No secret relationship, no hidden betrayal, just an old favor between two people who had once mattered to each other. Did Diane ever ask you to build Caleb's career? No. Caleb says you did. I helped him get an interview. One. Did you call the hiring manager? Yes. Did you tell him about the altered work order? I told him Caleb had made a serious administrative mistake, admitted it, and completed corrective work, so you didn't hide it. No. Did Caleb know that? Yeah, that changed things. Caleb had made Graham's help sound more secret than it was. Why would he tell me you built his career? Graham looked tired. Because Caleb has a habit of changing the size of other people's roles depending on what he needs. That sentence stayed with me. I thought about my own role. Father became absent father. Diane became struggling single mother. Graham became secret career maker. Everyone moved around inside Caleb's story, except Caleb. He always ended up in the center. What happens tomorrow? I asked. We ask him directly about the partner profile. And if he admits it, that doesn't automatically solve anything. Good. Graham studied. You really aren't going to defend him. He's 35. Diane would have. Diane isn't here. It sounded harsher than I intended, but it was true. Graham nodded. Then he said, there is one thing I think you should know before we meet him. What? The biography Neil showed you isn't the first version. He opened his laptop. Caleb sent me one 6 months ago. The document was shorter. I read the personal section. It said Caleb came from a working class family and learned responsibility from watching his parents work. Parent, plural, no abandonment, no single mother, no homelessness. What changed? I don't know. When did he change it? About 3 months ago. What happened 3 months ago? Graham looked at me. That's when we started discussing ownership. There it was. The lie had existed for. But when the stakes increased, Caleb sharpened it. I asked Graham to send both versions to me. Then I went home. At 4:30, Caleb was sitting in his car outside my house. I parked behind him. He got out. I know you said not to come over. Then why are you here? Because I didn't want you hearing everything from Graham. I already did. His expression changed. You saw him? Yes. I walked toward the house. Caleb followed. Inside, I put the 2 biographies on the kitchen table. Old version on the left, new version on the right. Explain. He read them. His shoulders dropped. I changed it. I can see that. Dad, 6 months ago you had parents. 3 months later, I abandoned you. He sat down. Why? He rubbed his hands together. Graham and Neil kept talking about the kind of partner they wanted. What kind? Someone resilient. Someone who understood risk personally. And having 2 parents wasn't resilient enough? It wasn't that simple. It looks remarkably simple on paper. He stared at the newer biography. I was competing with another guy. That was new. For the ownership position? Yeah. Who? Marcus Reed. He'd built a company after his family lost everything in the recession. And you thought you needed a better hardship store. Caleb didn't answer. That was the answer. I sat opposite. Was Marcus lying? No. So instead of competing on experience, you competed with his childhood. When you say it like that, how else should I say it? He looked away. I felt something settle. For 2 days, I'd been looking for some complicated explanation. There wasn't. Caleb had discovered years ago that that the abandoned son story earned sympathy. 3 months ago, he realized it might also earn equity. That was the point where an old lie became a current decision. Does Marcus know? No. Does he still want the position? He took another job. So you're the only candidate now? Yes, I nodded. Then tomorrow should be easy. Caleb looked at me. What does that mean? You tell Graham and Neil the truth. His face tightened. All of it? The part that concerns them. If I do that, the partnership is gone. Maybe, not maybe. I didn't respond. He stood and walked toward the window. Do you know what that equity could be worth in 5 years? No. Potentially hundreds of thousands. And? He turned. You can say that because it's not your opportunity. No, Caleb, I can say it because it isn't mine to save. Silent. Then he said, I didn't ask you to save it. You asked me to leave through your garage so Neil wouldn't see your father. He looked down. That was yesterday. Yes. Today you're sitting in my kitchen asking whether the truth is too expensive. He didn't answer. I slid the newer biography toward him. You wrote that I abandoned. I know. Your mother spent 37 years married to me, and you turned her into a struggling single mother because it made you sound stronger. I know. No, I don't think you do. His eyes lifted. I don't care that you made me look bad to strangers. That surprised. I care that you took the stability your mother and I spent our lives building and turned it into evidence that we failed. Caleb sat back down. For the first time since this started, he had nothing prepared. No explanation, no correction, just silence. Finally, he said, I was ashamed. Of me? No. Of my job? No. Then what? He looked at the two biographies of how much help I had. That was it. Not my clothes, not my house, not my social status. Help. I'd sit in rooms with people who built themselves from nothing, he said. And every time I talked about my career, there was always somebody behind it. You paid most of college. Mom introduced me to Graham. Graham got me an interview. You helped me move every time I changed apartment. And I started feeling like nothing was mine. I waited. So you erased the help. Yeah, that still doesn't make your work less yours. I know that now. No, you know it because the lie got caught. He flinched. Good. Not because I wanted to hurt him, because some sentences should be uncomfortable. I stood. Tomorrow you tell them. Caleb looked at me. And if I don't? That was the first time he'd asked the question directly. I thought before answering. I won't call them. Relief appeared too quickly. Then I finished. But if Graham or Neil asks me whether your story is true, I won't lie for you. The relief disappeared. You'd cost me the partnership. No. I tapped the biography. This might cost you the partnership. He stared at the page. You wrote it. For almost a minute, neither of us spoke. Then Caleb folded the new biography once. I'll tell them. I nodded. He walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned. Dad? What? There really is one more thing. I almost laughed. Of course there is. This isn't another lie. Go ahead. When Mom was dying, she asked me to tell you about all of this. I stopped. The work order incident? No. He looked at the folded biography in his hand. The story about you leaving. My voice lowered. She knew? Not everything, but enough. When? About 2 months before she died. What did she say? Caleb swallowed. She told me I had to fix it while you were still alive to hear the truth from me. I looked toward Diane's photograph. Why didn't you? I told her I would. That answer was worse than no answer. Because 5 years had passed. 5 years in which Caleb had not only failed to correct the lie, he had expanded it. I asked, did your mother leave anything about that? Caleb hesitated, then nodded. A voicemail. Where is it? I still have it. Why? Because I've never been able to delete it. I held out my hand. Send it to me. He didn't move. Caleb, his eyes stayed on mine. The message wasn't for me. What do you mean? She called my phone because you were downstairs getting her medication. He paused. But at the end, she said something for you. My hand dropped. What? Caleb looked at the door, then back at me. She made me promise that if I hadn't told you by the time she was gone, he swallowed. I was supposed to let you hear it yourself. Caleb sent me the voicemail at 4:58. I didn't play it. Not immediately. He had already left, and I stood alone in my kitchen, staring at the audio file on my phone. Diane's last month were not something I revisited casually. Her voice had changed near the end. Quieter, slower, but still heard. I poured a glass of water, sat at the table, and pressed play. There was a few seconds of movement. Then Diane spoke. Caleb, I don't want another argument about a pause. You've told people things about your father that aren't true. I don't care why it started anymore. I closed my eye. I know you're afraid of what happens if you correct, but every year you wait, you're making the correction harder. Then her voice softened. Your father isn't perfect, neither am I. But he stayed. He worked. He came home. He was there for you. I stopped the recording. That was enough for a minute. Then I played the rest. Near the end, Diane said, and if you're listening to this, Walter, then Caleb waited too long? A small pause. Oh, don't fix it for him. That was all. No final speech. No instruction to forgive him. Just 4 words. Don't fix it for him. I sat there until the screen went dark. For 5 years, Caleb had kept that recording. And for 5 years, he'd continued telling the story. The next morning at 9:06, Graham called. Caleb's here. Okay. He told us. I looked out the kitchen window. All of it? Enough. What happens now? We haven't decided. Then decide without me. Walter, he wants you here. No. A pause. Are you sure? Yes. This was Caleb's meeting. For once, I wasn't going to walk into the room and make his situation easier simply by being his father. At 11:40, Caleb called. I answered. They pulled the ownership offer. I said nothing. They're still willing to keep me involved as a consultant for 6 months. Do you want that? I don't know. Then think about it. He sounded surprised. You're not going to tell me what to do? No. No, why? Because that's how we got here. Silent. Then he said, Neil asked why I lied. What did you tell him? The truth, which is that I wanted them to think I'd built everything myself. I waited. And Graham? He asked why I thought having a good father made me less impressive. That one landed on me too. What did you say? Nothing. Probably the right answer. Caleb was quiet. Then, Dad, I'm sorry. I know. No, No, I mean, don't improve it. He stopped. Sorry is enough for today. We ended the call. I thought that was the end of the business side. It wasn't. At 2:15, Neil emailed me. Not Caleb, me. The subject line was, one question. The message was short. Walter, Caleb disclosed the false personal history this morning. There is one document he says he didn't write. Before we proceed, I need to know whether you've ever seen it. Attached was a PDF. I opened it. It was a one-page statement written in first person. Caleb's supposed account of his childhood. Most of it was familiar. Father left, mother struggled, son learned independence. But one paragraph was new. When I was 16, my father returned briefly and asked my mother for money. When she refused, he disappeared again. I read it twice. That had never happened. But the wording bothered me for another reason. It was more specific than anything I'd seen before. I called Neil. Where did this come from? Graham found it in the material prepared for potential investors. Who prepared the pack? Caleb assembled most of it. Most? We use an outside marketing contract. Did Caleb approve this page? He says he never saw it. Do you believe him? I don't know. Then why ask me? Because he said something strange when Graham showed it to him. What? He said, that's not my version. My version. Not that's false. Not I never said that. My version. Who wrote it? I asked. We're checking. I looked at the document again. Don't involve me unless you need to verify something about me. Fair. Before hanging up, Neil said, Walter, for what it's worth, Caleb didn't try to defend the biography this morning. That doesn't make it true. No, but it's a start. Maybe. 20 minutes later, Caleb called. Neil sent you the statement? Yeah, I didn't write it. I believe that you didn't write that page. He caught the distinction. But you think it's my fault. I think nobody could expand a lie you hadn't already created. Silent. Then Caleb said, I know who wrote it. Who? Marcus, the other candidate for the partnership. I remembered the name. The man you were competing with? Yes, that sounds convenient. I know. Evidence? Caleb hesitated. Not yet. Then don't accuse him. Dad, he had access to the material. So did other people. He knew my story. A lot of people knew your story. He went quiet. I could hear frustration in his breathing. Listen to me, I said. This is important. What? You've spent years turning incomplete facts into whatever version helped you most. He said nothing. Don't do it again because now you're scared. Another silence. Okay. Find out what happened. Don't invent what happened. Okay. That afternoon, I did something I should have done earlier. I stopped investigating. I went grocery shopping, changed the furnace filter, called my sister, made dinner. Caleb's professional mess could continue without becoming my full-time job. At 7:30, Graham called. We found the source. Marcus? No. Good thing Caleb hadn't called him. Who? Our marketing contractor. Why did they invent a story? They didn't. I waited. They pulled it from an interview Caleb gave 4 years ago. That changed things again. What interview? A local business podcast. Did Caleb say I came back asking Diane for money? Not exactly. Of course. What exactly? He said there was a period when his father was in and out and that money caused problems between his parents. Both false. But the contractor turned that into the paragraph. Yes. Did Caleb approve the final packet? Graham paused. His email says he did. There it was. Not authorship. Approval. Another smaller place to hide. Does he remember approving it? He says he reviewed the business pages, not the personal profile. That may even be true. You sound less angry than I expected. I'm getting tired, Graham. He laughed once, then became serious. We've decided not to use Caleb as a consultant. Because of this? Because we can't spend 6 months checking which sentence came from Caleb, which came from a contractor, and which version he meant. That was fair. Have you told him? I'm calling him next. Then call him. At 8:03, Caleb texted. They ended it completely. I didn't respond. 5 minutes later. I know you're probably thinking I deserve it, I replied. What I think doesn't change their decision. He called. Can I ask you something? Yes. If I hadn't told them this morning, would you have? I thought about Diane's voicemail. He seemed surprised. You wouldn't? If they asked me directly, I'd tell the truth, but I wasn't going to walk into your meeting and expose you. Why not? Because then you could spend the next 10 years saying your father ruined your partnership. He went quiet. I needed you to be the person who told them. Another long silence. Finally, I understand. Do you? I think so. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Caleb, losing the partnership isn't the important part. It feels pretty important tonight. I'm sure it does. What is the important part then? You had the opportunity to keep the lie alive this morning. He said nothing. And you didn't. That was the first decision he'd made in 2 days that I respect. Not enough to repair anything, but enough to notice. Caleb thanked me and hung up. I thought the day was finally over. At 9:16, my doorbell rang. I looked through the window. Graham was on the porch. He held an old manila envelope. I opened the door. If this is another biography, take it home. It isn't. What is it? Something Diane left with me. I stared at him. You told me the letter was all you had. I said it was what I'd found Saturday. That's not the same thing. No, I didn't invite him in yet. What did she leave? Graham held out the envelope. She gave this to me at the hospital. When? About 3 weeks before she died. Why you? She didn't want you to see it while she was alive. I felt my patience disappear. Everyone seems to have been very busy deciding what I should know. Graham accepted that. You're right. I took the envelope. My name was written across the front. Diane's handwriting again. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. This wasn't about Caleb's career. It wasn't about Graham. It was about me. Diane had written, Walter, if Caleb still hasn't told you the truth after I'm gone, please don't confuse protecting him with loving him. I did that once, and I think I helped create this problem. I kept reading. Then I reached the final line. There is one thing Caleb doesn't know. I stopped. Graham watched. What doesn't he know? Read it. I did. Diane had known about the false story much earlier than Caleb believed. Not 2 months before her death. Almost 6 years earlier. She had found one of his professional personal biographies by accident, and she had confronted him. According to her letter, Caleb promised her he would correct it. He didn't, but Diane hadn't told me. She had given him time, then more time, then another chance. By the time she understood that her protection was helping the lie survive, she was already sick. The last sentence was only 9 words. I protected him from you when I should have trusted you. I lowered the page. For 2 days, I'd thought this story was about what my son had done to me. Now I understood there was another part. Diane had made a mistake too. Not the same mistake, but one that mattered. She had spent years protecting our son from a consequence that hadn't even happened yet. And without meaning to, she'd taught him something dangerous. If the truth became uncomfortable enough, someone who loved him might help carry. This time I wasn't going to. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry with Diane. She had been gone 5 years. I wasn't going to put a dead woman on trial for a decision she'd already admitted was wrong. What bothered me was the pattern. Caleb made a bad decision at 22. Diane gave him time to correct it. He did. Later, he began lying about his family. Diane discovered that too. Again, she gave him time. This time he didn't correct it. And every extra month without consequences taught him that the truth could wait. By Monday morning, I knew what I needed to do. Nothing. For Caleb, that distinction mattered. At 8:20, he called. I heard Graham came over. Yes. What did he want? He brought me something from your mother. Silent. What? A letter? What did it say? That stays between your mother and me. He didn't like that. I could hear it. Was it about me? Partly. Then I think I should know. No. Dad, you've spent years deciding what other people were allowed to know about their own lives. I'm not continuing that habit. He went quiet. Then he said, okay. That was new. No argument. No attempt to pull the answer out of me. I asked, what are you doing today? Calling my boss. That got my attention. Why? Caleb still had his regular job. The failed partnership with Graham and Neil was separate. I used the same background story at work. How extensively? More than I want to admit. Then admit it accurately. He exhaled. I have a meeting at 11. With who? My supervisor and HR. I didn't tell him whether I thought that was smart. He was finally making his own decision. At 12:46, he called again. They're reviewing it. What does that mean? I keep working. They're checking whether I used any false information in hiring document, company material. Did you? Not on my original application. That was good. But there are 2 leadership profiles on the company website, and I told the story during an internal conference. Did you tell them that? Yes. What did they say? That they'll contact. I waited. Then Caleb added, I almost didn't tell them. Why did you? A long pause. Because I heard Mom's voicemail again this morning. I said nothing. She was right. About what? Every year made it harder. That was enough. Over the next week, things became quieter. That was good for Caleb. Probably bad for a dramatic story. But real consequences are often paperwork, closed doors, and waiting. His employer removed the online profiles while they reviewed them. Graham and Neil moved forward without him. The ownership opportunity was gone. Nobody screamed at him. Nobody publicly exposed him. Nobody needed to. On Friday afternoon, Caleb came to my house. This time he called first. We sat on the back porch. He looked exhausted. My company is keeping me. I nodded. Same position? For now. Any discipline? A formal warning. I can't represent the company publicly for 12 months. How do you feel about that? Lucky. That was the right word. Then he handed me a sheet of paper. What is this? A list. I didn't take it. Of what? Places where I used the story. How many? 17. I looked at him. Caleb, I told you I'm not managing this. I know. Then why give it to me? I'm not asking you to decide. He turned the page toward himself. I wanted to say them out loud to someone. I sat back. Fine. He started reading. 2 company biographies, 3 conference introductions, podcast, 4 job interviews, several dinners with colleagues, a college alumni event. Then he stopped. What? There's one I didn't remember until yesterday. I waited. Mom's funeral. That was unexpected. What about it? Caleb looked at the page. Neil wasn't the first person I lied to who had known you. I felt something tighten. Who was? A man named Frank Dorsey. I knew Frank. He had worked with me for nearly 20 years. He'd retired to Florida before Diane got sick. He came to the funeral? Yeah. I remembered seeing him there. What did you tell him? Nothing at the funeral. Then why is he on the list? Because I saw him again about a year later at a conference. I waited. He was with 2 people from a company I wanted to work for. And he introduced me as your son. Of course he did. What did you do? Caleb stared at the porch floor. I corrected him. The word hung there. How? I said he had me confused with someone else. I didn't move. Caleb continued. After Frank walked away, I told them he'd known my mother and always assumed you were my father because you'd helped us some. That one hurt. Not because it was worse than abandonment, because it was so casual. He had reduced 30 years of fatherhood to a family friend who occasionally helped. What did Frank do? He heard me. I looked at Caleb. He was still close enough? Yeah. What did he say? Nothing. Did you ever speak to him afterward? No. So a man who worked beside me for 20 years heard my son deny I was his father, and you never corrected it? No. I stood and walked to the railing. For several seconds, I watched a squirrel move along the fence. Caleb stayed seated. Finally, he said, that's the one I'm most ashamed of. Why? Because you weren't even there. I turned. He continued. I couldn't tell myself I panicked because you walked into the room. Nobody was confronting me. Frank just said something true, and I changed it because the truth didn't fit. That was probably the clearest explanation he'd given me. Is Frank alive? Yes. You looked this morning. What are you going to do? Call him. Good. Caleb looked at me. Will you come with me if he wants to meet? No. He nodded. This time he didn't ask why. Before he left, he said, I understand something. What? When you told me you wouldn't call Graham and Neil, I thought you were protecting me. I wasn't. I know. He put the list in his pocket. You were making me decide whether I was going to protect myself. That was closer. After he left, I went inside. There was a message from Graham. Can Can you call me when you have a minute? I called. Everything okay? Yes, I wanted to tell you something before Caleb does. What? Neil and I chose another part. That was expected. It's Marcus Reed. I remembered Caleb's competitor. The man with the real hardship story. Graham went quiet. I wouldn't describe him that way. Good answer. Does Caleb know? Not yet. Why are you telling me? Because I'm meeting Caleb tomorrow. He asked for feedback on why we passed on him. And? I want to be honest. You should be. I'm worried he'll hear Marcus's name and think this was about whose childhood was worth. I understood. What was it about? Trust. Simple. Then tell him that. Graham hesitated. Walter, there's something else. I almost told him I didn't want to hear it. Then he said, Caleb recommended Marcus. That stopped. When? This morning. For the partnership? Yes. Why? He said Marcus had the experience we needed and that we'd been overlooking him because we were too focused on finding someone who could sell the company. That didn't sound like the Caleb I'd been dealing with. Did he ask you to tell me? No. Then don't. Graham laughed. Quiet. Fair enough. We hung up. The next afternoon, Caleb called Frank Dorsey. I know because Frank called me 20 minutes later. Walter Hayes. I hadn't heard that voice in years. Frank. You know why I'm calling? I have an idea. There was a pause. Your boy just apologized to me. What did you say? I told him he owed the apology to you. That sounds like you. Frank laughed. Then his voice became serious. You know, I almost called you that day. Why didn't you? Because I figured there were family problems I didn't understand. There it was. Another consequence of the lie. It didn't just change what people believe. It made decent people stay away because they thought the truth wasn't their business. I'm glad you didn't, I said. You are? Caleb needed to be the one to tell me. Frank was quiet. Then he asked, you two okay? No. I looked toward the photograph of Diane. But we're talking. Sometimes that's the same direction. We spoke for another 10 minutes. Old co-workers, retirement, his grandchildren, normal thing. After we hung up, I realized something. Caleb's lie had taken years to build because it had spread quietly. The correction would work the same way. Not one grand confession. 17 smaller ones. Some people would forgive him. Some wouldn't care. That evening, Caleb stopped by. He looked calmer. I heard Marcus got it, he said. Yes, you already knew. Graham called. Caleb smiled slightly. Of course he did. Are you angry? A little. At Marcus? No. At Graham? No. Then who? Myself. I nodded. He looked around the kitchen. Frank told me something today. What? He said you used to talk about me at work all the time. I didn't respond. He said everyone knew when I graduated college because you wouldn't shut up about it. That sounds exaggerated. He said you carried my graduation picture in your truck. I carried a picture of you and your mother. You were in it too. Unfortunately, Caleb smiled. Then his expression changed. I spent years telling people I had no father while you were telling people about your son. There wasn't anything useful I could add, so I didn't. After a moment, Caleb said, there's one person left that I don't know how to correct. I looked at. Who? He reached into his pocket and put his phone on the table. On the screen was an old email. The recipient wasn't a coworker. It wasn't Graham. It wasn't Frank. It was Diane, sent 7 years earlier, before she became sick. The subject line was, Dad. I looked at Caleb. What is this? I forgot I'd sent it. I read the first paragraph. Caleb had told his own mother that the story about me leaving had become too established professionally to undo. Diane had replied the same day. Her response was only 3 sentences. Then lose whatever the truth costs you. Your father deserves better than being useful to you as a lie. And one day, you're going to need him more than you need the story. I looked up. Caleb's eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. She knew exactly what would happen, he said. No. He frowned. She knew what should happen. I handed the phone back. What actually happens next is still up to you. And for the first time since Neil Foster appeared at my door, I thought Caleb might finally understand the difference. 3 weeks passed before Caleb came to my house again. By then, the noise around the partnership had stopped. Marcus had accepted the ownership position. Caleb's employer had completed its review and kept him under the restrictions they'd already given him. And according to Caleb, he'd contacted everyone on his list who still mattered professional. I hadn't checked. That was intentional. If I had to verify every correction, then he still wasn't taking responsibility. He was performing it for me. That Saturday morning, I was replacing a damaged board on the back step when his car pulled in. Caleb came around the side of the house carrying 2 coffees. I didn't know if you'd be home. My truck's outside. Good detective work. He handed me a cup, then looked at the board. Need help? No. He nodded. Okay. He sat on the step anyway. For a while I worked and he drank his coffee. Then he said, I turned down a promotion yesterday. I stopped measuring. You were offered one? Temporary regional supervisor? 6 months? Why'd you turn it down? He shrugged. It would have put me back in front of clients. Your restriction ends next year. I know. So? He looked at the yard. I don't want another title right now. That answer bothered me. Caleb, losing opportunities isn't the same thing as becoming honest. He looked at me. I know. Do you? I think so. Because if you start punishing yourself every time something good happens, eventually you'll resent everyone involved in this, including you, especially me. He considered that. So you think I should take it? I think you should stop asking what decision makes you look most sorry. That silenced him. I cut the board. Caleb watched me fit it into place. Then he said, I'll call them Monday. Good. I didn't expect you to say that. You still have to work. He smiled slightly. A few minutes later, his phone rang. He looked at the screen and didn't answer. Who? Graham. Why aren't you answering? I don't know what he wants. There's one way to find out, Caleb answered. Hey, Graham. I kept working. Then Caleb stopped talking. His expression changed. When? He listened. No, I understand. Another pause. Yes, I'll send it. He hung up. What happened? Neil found another copy of the investor profile. I put the drill down. I thought this was finished. So did I. What copy? An earlier draft. What's different? Caleb looked uncomfortable. It has your signature. signature. I stared at it. My signature? On a statement saying you approved my account of our family history. Did I? No. Did you put it there? No. I waited. Caleb didn't look away. A month earlier, I wouldn't have believed that answer. Now I wasn't going to assume either way. Who did? I think I know. Evidence first. He nodded. Mom. I said nothing. She signed things for you sometime, didn't she? Yes, with my permission. Graham says the document is dated 6 years ago. That was before Diane got sick, before the voicemail, before the letter admitting she'd protected Caleb too long. I understood what he was suggesting. Send me the document. He did. I opened it on my phone. At the bottom was a short statement. I confirmed that the family background described above substantially accurate. Below it, Walter Hayes. The signature looked like mine, very much like mine. Something was wrong. I enlarged it. Then I knew. That's not your mother's handwriting? You're sure? Yes. Could somebody have copied your signature? Obviously. Who had access to it? Half the people I've done business with. I looked at him. Don't build another theory. He nodded. Right. We drove to Graham's office together. Not because Caleb needed me there, because my signature was now involved. Neil had the document printed when we arrived. Graham placed the older investor materials beside it. This came from an archived folder our contractor sent us, he said. I read the entire page. The personal history was less dramatic than Caleb's later version. It said his father had been largely absent during his teenage years. Still false. Caleb, I said, did you write this version? Yes. No hesitation. Did you ask anyone to sign my name? No. Did you know this statement existed? No. Neil opened his laptop. The file metadata identifies the person who added the signature. He turned the screen. A name appeared. Graham Cole. Nobody spoke. I looked at Graham. His face had changed. Caleb stood. You? Graham didn't answer immediately. Neil did. You told me you'd never helped support the family story. I didn't write the story. You signed Walter's name under it. Graham looked at me. I can explain. I almost laughed. I'd heard that sentence enough for one lifetime. Go ahead. 6 years earlier, Caleb had been applying for a leadership program sponsored by a company Graham worked with. The application required someone who had known him for years to confirm his personal background. Caleb had asked Graham. Graham refused. Then Diane called. She was afraid the contradiction would expose everything, Graham said. So she asked you to impersonate me? No. What did she ask? To help Caleb get through that application, and you decided this was how? Graham nodded slowly. I had an old document with your signature from a vendor contract. I copied it. Caleb stared at him. You never told? No. Why? Because Diane didn't want you knowing how far she'd gone to protect. That was the first moment I saw Caleb understand his mother's letter differently. She hadn't just hidden his lie from me. She had helped keep it alive. Once, and regretted it. I looked at Graham. You forged my signature. Yes. No excuse this time. Did that application involve money? No. Training and a leadership designation. Anything else you signed for me? No. Anything else you falsified for Caleb? Graham looked at Neil, then back at me. No. Can you prove that? No. Fair answer. Neil closed the lap. This changes our situation. Caleb looked at him. What situation? Our company. Neil's voice stayed calm. Graham and I need to discuss whether I'm still comfortable going into business with him. Graham nodded. He didn't argue. That was his consequence, not mine to decide. Caleb looked at me. For years, he'd built a story where I was the unreliable father, and Graham was one of the men who helped him succeed without me. Now the irony was sitting at the table with us. The father he'd erased had done nothing to him. The man he'd used as proof of his independence had actually falsified a document to protect him. But I didn't enjoy that. There was nothing satisfying about watching another piece of Diane's judgment come apart. Caleb sat down again. Dad, I didn't know. I believe you. He looked up sharply. It was the first time I'd said that to him since this began. I believe you didn't know about the signature. His face changed. Not relief exactly. Something quieter. Thank you. Don't thank me for believing something that's true. Neil kept the original file. I asked for a copy. Then Caleb and I left. Outside, he stopped beside my truck. I spent all these years thinking Graham was the person who gave me a second chance. He was. He also helped me lie. Yes, and Mom asked him to. Apparently. Caleb looked toward the building. Are you angry with her? Yeah. He seemed surprised. Can you be angry with someone who's dead? Of course. What do you do with it? Nothing. He frowned. I love your mother. She made a bad decision. Both things can be true. He nodded slowly. Then he said, I think I've been doing the opposite. How? See, if someone helped me, I thought admitting I'd done something wrong meant their help didn't count. I understood. So I kept making myself the person who survived everything alone. Yeah. And eventually, you needed everyone else to be worse so you could look better. He didn't like hearing it, but he nodded. Yeah. We drove separately home. That evening, Neil called. He and Graham had agreed to delay finalizing their company partnership while Neil reviewed several older documents. Marcus had been informed. No one had accused Graham of anything beyond what he'd admitted. That was appropriate. Then Neil said, Caleb did something today you should know about. What? He asked us not to reconsider him for the ownership position. Why would you? Because Graham's conduct changes some of what happened. No, it doesn't. That's exactly what Caleb said. I stayed quiet. Neil continued. He said Graham falsifying a document doesn't make Caleb's biography true. That was the first time I heard about my son refusing an excuse nobody would have blamed him for taking. Don't tell him you called me. I won't. We hung up. Sunday morning, I found Caleb at my front door at 8:30. No emergency. No new document. He held my old tool bag. You left this in my garage. I looked at it. The same bag I'd carried out of his house the night he asked me to leave. I wondered where that. He handed it over. Then he said, I'm having people over next Saturday. I waited. People from work, okay? I want you to come. I looked at him. Why? Dinner. That's not what I'm asking. He understood. For a moment, I saw him searching for the right answer. Then he stopped searching. Because you're my father. Simple. I nodded. I'll think about it. He smiled faint. Fair. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Caleb. He looked back. If I come, don't introduce me to prove anything. His smile disappeared. I won't. And don't apologize for me. I won't. Then maybe I'll come. He nodded. After he drove away, I carried the tool bag inside. On top was the screwdriver I'd used on his cabinet that first Saturday. I remembered standing in his kitchen while Neil's car entered the driveway. Caleb asking me to use the garage, trying to keep two versions of his life from meeting at the front door. Next Saturday, he'd have another chance. Not to give a speech, not to confess, just to open the same door and tell the truth. I still hadn't decided whether I'd be there to see if he could do it. I went. Saturday at 5:55. I parked in front of Caleb's house. For a few seconds, I stayed in the truck. The last time I'd been there, I'd walked out carrying a tool bag while my son tried to make sure Neil didn't discover who I was. This time, there were already cars in the driveway. I rang the bell. Caleb opened the door. Hey, Dad. Hey. No hesitation. No glance behind. He stepped aside. There were 5 people in the living room. I recognized none of them. Caleb walked in with me. This is my dad, Walter. That was it. One sentence. A woman named Rachel shook my hand. A man from Caleb's operations team asked whether I was the retired facilities guy Caleb had mentioned. That's me. He says you can hear a bad bearing from across a mechanical room. Caleb exaggerated. Caleb looked at. For half a second, the room went quiet in my head. Then I added, usually I need to be inside the mechanical room. They laughed. Caleb did too. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody asked where I'd been for 20 years. Nobody looked shocked that Caleb had a father. We ate. People talked about work, football, property taxes, and somebody's disastrous kitchen renovation. Normal conversation. And I realized how much effort Caleb had spent avoiding something that required almost no effort at all. The truth wasn't difficult to say. Living with what he'd already said was difficult. After dinner, I found him loading the dishwasher. You don't have to do that, he said. I know. I handed him a plate. He put it in the rack. Then he said quietly, I told Rachel. Told her what? The old story? I stopped. When? Months ago. And? I corrected it for tonight. What did she say? That it was weird. I almost laughed. She's right. She also asked why I did it. What did you tell her? That I wanted people to think I'd had less help than I did. No abandoned father speech. No complicated explanation. Just the truth. Good. He nodded. We finished the dishes. I left around 9. At the door, Caleb said, thanks for coming. Dinner was good. I didn't cook most of it. I know. He smiled. Then I drove home. That could have been the ending. It wasn't. 3 days later, Neil called. He and Graham had finished reviewing their old record. Graham admitted the copied signature was the only document he'd falsified. Neil believed him, but their business arrangement changed. They didn't split dramatic. They didn't sue each other. Neil simply refused to enter an equal partnership with someone whose records he now felt he had to verify. They restructured the company before it even launched. Graham accepted a smaller role. Marcus stayed. Caleb stayed out. Those were Graham's consequences. Caleb had his own. He didn't get the ownership stake. His employer kept the restrictions on him. Several professional profiles were corrected or removed, and a few people stopped returning his call. He never told me who. I didn't ask. 6 months passed. Caleb kept his job. Then he was promoted. Not because the company forgot what happened, because he'd done good work after. When he told me, he sounded almost uncomfortable. I got regional operations manager. Congratulations. They know everything. I assume that's why you told them. They still gave it to me. Then take the job. He laughed. That's what you said last time. Still apply. Our relationship didn't return to normal. I don't think relationships return. They either change into something that work or they don't. For a while, Caleb called every Sunday. Then he stopped calling on a schedule. That was actually better. Sometimes he called because he needed advice. Sometimes because the Panthers had done something stupid. Sometimes because he was standing in Home Depot trying to remember what size anchor to buy. Ordinary thing. Trust came back that way. Not through one apology. Through hundreds of small moments where he could have hidden something and didn't. One afternoon, almost a year after Neil first came to my door, Caleb helped me clean the garage. He found Diane's old box of photographs. We sat on the floor going through them. There was Caleb at 7 holding his first fishing rod. Caleb at 12 beside a science fair project. Caleb at 17 leaning against the used Honda we'd bought together. Then the college graduation photograph. Diane on one side, me on the other. Caleb held it for a while. I used to hate this picture. Why? Because it proved too much. I knew exactly what he meant. 2 parents, both present, both proud. No abandoned teenager. No struggling single mother. No self-made young man standing alone. What do you think when you see it now? I asked. He looked at the photograph. That I was lucky. I didn't answer. He put it back in the box. Then he found something else. Diane's letter. The one she'd left for me before she died. I took it from him before he could read it. That's mine. He nodded. Okay. No question. No argument. That mattered too. Before he left that afternoon, he stood beside his car. Dad? Yeah? I've wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. Why didn't you expose me? I knew what he meant. I could have contacted his employer immediately. Sent documents around. Called colleagues. Made sure everyone knew what he'd done. I didn't need to. But you were angry. Yes. You could have destroyed my career. That wouldn't have made the story about me true. He waited. I continued. And if I'd destroyed everything for you, eventually you might have decided that was the reason your life fell apart. He looked down. I wanted you to see what your own decisions cost. He nodded. And I did. Good. Then he asked the harder question. Do you forgive me? A year earlier, I wouldn't have known how to answer. Now I did. Yes. His eyes came. But forgiveness isn't pretending it didn't happen. I know. And I'm not not giving you back the version of me you used in that story. What do you mean? The father who exists to explain your failure. He nodded. That man never existed. No. You had a father, Caleb. I know. You still do. He swallowed. Then he got into his car. A few weeks later, I drove to his house for Sunday dinner. I arrived early. Caleb was in the kitchen trying to fix the same cabinet hinge I'd worked on the night this started. You've got the wrong screw, I said. He looked at his hand. No, I don't. You do. He tried it. It didn't fit. He handed me the screwdriver. Fine. I replaced it. Caleb leaned against the counter. You know what's funny? What? That night, I really did ask you over to fix this. I know. I wasn't planning to throw you out. What changed? When Neil texted that he was 5 minutes away, I panicked. I remember. I thought if he saw you, everything I'd built would collapse. I tightened the hinge. And did it? Some of it. I tested the door. It closed properly. Caleb continued. But not the parts I thought. I looked at him. My career didn't end. My life didn't. No. I lost the partnership. Yes. Some people don't trust me anymore. That's theirs to decide. He nodded. Then he looked toward the front window. The thing I almost lost was you. That was close enough to a speech that I wasn't going to help him make it longer. Set the table. He smiled. Yes, sir. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. 2 of his friends had arrived. Caleb opened the door. I heard voices from the hallway. Then one of them walked into the kitchen. Caleb followed. This is my father, Walter. Again, simple, true. And this time I understood something. The worst thing my son had done wasn't telling people I abandoned him. It wasn't pretending Diane raised him alone. It wasn't even asking me to leave before his friends arrived. It was convincing himself that the good things he'd been given somehow made the things he'd earned worth less. So he removed us, first from his story, then from photograph, then from conversation. Eventually, he almost removed us from his actual life. The morning after he asked me to leave, Neil Foster stood outside my house because one detail didn't make sense. That one detail pulled apart years of lies. I could have spent the next year making Caleb pay for every one of them. I didn't. I did something harder. I stopped protecting him from the price of the truth. He lost an ownership opportunity. He lost some trust. He had to correct people who'd admired a man who never existed. And he had to accept that his real story was less dramatic. His parents stayed together. His mother loved him. His father showed up. He made mistakes. He received help. He worked hard. He succeeded anyway. There was nothing impressive about surviving an abandoned childhood Caleb never had. But there was something respectable about finally standing in front of people who knew the old story and saying, I lied. Diane had written 4 words in that voicemail. Don't fix it for him. I finally understood what she meant. I couldn't repair Caleb by removing the consequences. All I could do was stop carrying consequences that belonged to him. The rest was his work. And almost a year after my son asked me to disappear before his friends arrived, I stood in the same kitchen while he introduced me without hesitation. Not as a handyman, not as a family friend, not as a man from his family friend, not as a man from his mother's past, as his father. He had spent years believing the truth made him look smaller. In the end, telling it was the first thing that made me respect him again.